Hey there, welcome to the first actual episode of my little project called Saucemancy. If you watch the introduction, I explained that it's essentially just a YouTube series I'm going to be doing about game design and kind of breaking things down into the nitty-gritty of it rather than looking at everything on a surface level. Before I get into the next topic, which is the topic of this video, just know when it comes to things like narrative, music, graphics, that's not really what this channel is going to be about. In fact, it's going to be mostly about the three things I'm about to put on the board. So the first is a variable. The next is a mechanic. Kind of wish these markers were better. Oh, there we go. And lastly is a system. Now, I'm going to explain all three of these for the sake of game design or gameplay design. But first off is a variable. Variable is a purposed, my God, this thing's rickety. Purposed, alterable value. So what could that mean? So there are a bunch of different things that could be a variable. For example, a simple Boolean check in a game, which is saying whether something is true or false. That's a variable. For example, if you're talking to a character in a game, there might be some tracker in that game that wants to see if you've talked to that character before, and that'll change how they interact with you. And that would be a variable. It's a true or false variable. Generally speaking, when we're talking about variables on this channel, we're talking about numerical ones. Those would be, for example, if you're playing your typical role-playing game, your health is a variable, your strength is a variable, your intelligence is a variable, or if you're casting a spell, the damage it does, the cooldown, its mana cost, those are all variables. They're things that can be altered. They might have a set value at, the moment. It might be that to throw a fireball, it costs you 60 mana to do that. But at any point, a developer could go into the code of the game and alter that. Or there could be an effect in the game that alters it. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself. So a mechanic is an interlocked group of variables. And we'll throw in a little asterisk here that achieve a certain purpose. So they're not just linked together for no reason. There's a reason to it all. So I think one fun way to think of this is if you think of a variable, if you're much of a sciencey person, a variable is like an atom. You got your little hydrogen atom here. He's chilling. A mechanic is more like a molecule. So let's say water. You got H2O. Kind of looks like a mouse. Don't sue me, Disney. But, so variable, atom, mechanic, bunch of atoms coming together to make a molecule. And that molecule serves a different purpose than just the atoms that it's composed of. So let's think of this, a very common mechanic in most games is your health bar. You might not think of it as a mechanic, but in plenty of games you got a health bar. It could be a literal bar of health, or if you're a Legend of Zelda fan, you got a few hearts that are just set up with one another. Or if you're an ARPG fan, you got your old health orb. But none of that really matters for the sake of this. They all have a similar function. So what are the functions of your health? Well, let's look at it. Let's draw a little health bar here. Say, and it's about 75% full. Now you got 3 variables here that are of importance that are all working together to make the health bar. You have X, Y, and Z. Now in this situation, what are X, Y, and Z? I'm going to go over here, I have a little more room. So I'll put X here, Y here, Z here. So your X is your minimum health, or in this case, I'm actually going to refer to it as a minimum threshold, which I hope I'm spelling correctly. I usually forget at least one H in there. Your Y is your current health value. Just put HP. And Z is your maximum health, or we're going to put maximum threshold. Oops. All right, so there's a specific reason I chose to use the term threshold here instead of just, health. But let's get into, okay, your health bar, minimum, current, maximum. All of these variables can be adjusted at any point. Your minimum threshold doesn't necessarily need to be 0. Your maximum threshold is probably going up when you're leveling up your health stat or something like that. And your current value is generally the one that is most important, for gameplay. Because obviously, if your current HP is at the maximum threshold, it can't go up anymore, usually. If it's at the minimum threshold, it can't go down anymore, and you probably lose. However, the aspect of losing touches into the final thing here, which is the system. Now, the system is frequently interacting. Wow, that is a screwed up Y. Let me redo that. Okay. Frequently interacting variables and mechanics. With another little asterisk here that systems can include subsystems. All right. So let's look at the health bar again. And you got your minimum, current, maximum. So let's say that your Y, your current HP value, is suddenly the same as X, your minimum threshold, i.e. your health is 0 or perhaps below 0. Whatever the case, the game probably has a system in place that says when your health hits 0, you lose. Now, that isn't intrinsically tied to the mechanic. The mechanic is, again, just the minimum, current, and maximum. There's nothing inherent to the mechanic that says when this hits 0, you lose. And there's an important reason for that, because a lot of games have numerous fail states. There are numerous ways to get a game over. Some might be, you just fall off a ledge. And in some cases, the game might do that by just saying if you fall off a ledge, your health instantly hits 0, and then because it's 0, then you're dead. Or it could be that there is just a sensor in the game that says once you go past this point, you lose. So that is to say that the aspect of losing frequently interacts with the mechanic of your health and it becoming 0, but it is not as intrinsically tied to it as minimum current and maximum health. For example, you cannot have the health bar mechanic without these values. It wouldn't work. But you can have the system of getting a game over without this. So they frequently interact, but they aren't interlocked, if that checks out. And a system can also include subsystems. I'll get into that in a little bit. Now, the very final thing I want to put on here, so all three of these are important, but the very last, oh my God, my knee. My very last thing that I want to put on here is gameplay. Now, gameplay is generally a user's interactions with all of the above. I was going to just write systems, but it's honestly all of it. All of the above. So it could be something very simple. It could be the conscious decision to increase your maximum health. Well, that's just one variable. That's Z here. So you're interacting with that variable. Even that little decision, that's gameplay. You increase your maximum health. You could make a conscious decision during gameplay to heal yourself. So let's say that you drink your health potion and it gives you 30% your health back. So that would bring Y up to Z. So that's interacting with the mechanic. The mechanic of health, you drink a healing potion. Now, the healing potion is also, of course, a system because it is a separate item that has a separate variable attached to it, which is your percent health. And then that system of health takes the healing, takes the potion, takes the health bar, and it combines them. And all of that is gameplay. That is the character, or the player, you, making a conscious decision to do all of these things. So constantly, when you're playing a game, you're interacting with these three things. Even if you're just playing like a visual novel or something, there might not be too complex of systems and mechanics or variables, but they're definitely there. That could touch upon, as I said earlier, that system of if you've talked to somebody before, the game might have a variable that keeps track of if you've talked to them, or even a mechanic or system that if you talk to them a certain amount, your affection toward them goes up or whatever. Whatever the point, no matter what type of game you're playing, all three of these things are going to contribute to gameplay. Now, I want to talk about, to get more into the nitty-gritty, can I lock this thing? There's got to be a way. I'll figure it out later. Now, get into the nitty-gritty here. I'm going to talk about, oh my God, this thing takes a while to erase. Bear with me here. It'll be worth it, I swear. So we're going to talk about one of the most common systems in any video game. If you've played a video game, you've experienced this system. All right. Oh, my goodness, there we go. All right. Now, this system is a new color here, exciting. Combat. Exciting. So, combat, in my opinion, is one of the most common systems in basically any video game. I would wager that a good 80 to 90% at least of commonly known video games include combat as a primary system. So let's set this up here. Let's say we got our main character here. He's a cool warrior guy. He's got a shield and he's got a sword. He's on a quest. What's he doing? And all of a sudden in this quest, he comes across this dubious creature. Alright, so as we all know, if you're a warrior in a quest and you come across a dubious creature, you have to fight it. So now there are a lot of considerations to make here, and things that just show how truly varied variables, mechanics, and systems can be. So let's, for the sake of not overwhelming everyone on the first episode, let's just assume this is a turn-based game. So first, this fella here, he's gonna attack, or maybe he attacks second. We'll talk about that in a second too. And this guy's gonna attack back, and it's gonna keep going until one of them is defeated. So let's talk about all the possible variables and mechanics that could be involved here. The system is generally combat itself, though there are some subsystems I want to talk about. So let's say each of these characters has a health bar. So that goes into the previous mechanic that we talked about. You got your current health, minimum threshold, maximum threshold. Now, for the player character, if you reach the minimum threshold of your health, you're probably going to lose, or you'll get kicked out of the battle, or something is going to happen. It's generally going to be a fail state, unless it's one of those funny encounters where you're supposed to lose and it's basically impossible to win, and it like throws you into a dungeon or something afterwards. Some games do that, but that's beyond this point. And for the creature, when its health hits 0, we're probably going to get like EXP points or something. Not all games give EXP when you defeat things, but the vast majority of them do. We'll probably get EXP, maybe we'll get some money, maybe like its tail pop off, and we can take that and make a nice little piece of armor with it. Maybe we'll recruit it, maybe we can have the creature with us. There's so many different things that can happen. But generally speaking, the point of this combat encounter is for one of these two things to get the other one's health to 0, to defeat it. Now, there are a bunch of things that could go into this. So first off, you have this system of offense versus defense. So these are some subsystems in combat. So offense, what mechanics or variables might go into that? So for offense, we could have the mechanic, we can attack. All right. And what goes into attacking? Well, it could be a few things. It could be, what is the damage it deals. It could be that there's an element to the attack, or the kind of melee attack it is. If you've played Souls games, you have strike, you have pierce, and you have slash, and all of those are effective against different enemies. Like strike is effective against armored guys. I'm not going to get too into that, but whatever the case, you have an element. If you've played Pokemon, pretty common turn-based RPG, you have the accuracy. What is the chance that it's going to hit? So those are just some base components of attacking. Now these individually are probably variables. Your damage is a variable, your element is a variable, your accuracy is a variable, and they all go into the mechanic of an attack, which then feeds into the system of offense, because there are different ways to have offense other than just attacking. So let's look at defense now. All right, so defending. What can this dubious little creature do to prevent us from destroying it? So, what is its health? That's a mechanic and variable we've talked about a lot so far. What is, if there's elements involved, what are its, elemental weaknesses and strengths? I'm going to quickly jump back to the Pokemon example because that's one a lot of people are going to be familiar with. There are elemental type matchups in that game. For example, if a electric type move hits a flying type Pokemon, it deals more damage. If an electric type move hits a ground type Pokemon, it doesn't do any damage at all. So that's the counteracting to, if your game has an element system, what are the specific weaknesses and strengths of this creature? And to go against accuracy, perhaps, there is, that's not the first letter of that word, there is an evasion mechanic. Maybe. And question marks. We don't know if these are necessarily here. These are just things that could be there. So these are sort of basic considerations. We're talking about the system of combat for, a pretty simple game. And both from a game developer perspective and from a player's perspective, we have to consider all of these things. The developer has to consider it in the way of, how do I want combat to flow? What do I want the player to be worrying about? And the player has to worry about it in the way of, how do I kill this dubious creature who has encountered me on the road? Or let's say defeat. We might not necessarily kill it. I don't really want to kill that guy. He's kind of nice. Let's give him a little bow tie even, just to show, he's an upstanding guy. So maybe we don't want to kill him. Maybe it's just like a little disagreement. Maybe it's it's just a tutorial fight. So, but we want to defeat him. We want to move forward. Now the player has to worry. Is my attack going to do enough damage? Or, since this is turn-based, how many turns is it going to take me to defeat this creature? Can I survive that long? Because as soon as the attack phase of this hero is over, the creature now has the chance to attack, and these things are going to swap. So it's just an ebb and flow. And the player has to make all of these gameplay decisions given the variables and mechanics that they have in order to win. Or maybe even if they lose, in order to learn something, learn a way to approach the fight differently. For example, if this thing has really high evasion, maybe we need a way to raise our accuracy or use moves that are more accurate, or maybe that can't miss. Those are commonly a thing in role-playing games too. All right, so what else do I want to talk about here? We got our offense versus our defense. And so this is one of the simplest versions of combat that you could have. Now let's think of a slightly more advanced form of combat. Let's think about Dark Souls, which is a game I will probably bring up a lot on this channel, because a lot of good game design things learned from that game. A lot of bad ones too. We'll talk about those later. So in Dark Souls, you got this guy, he's like a little stick figure. His name is John Dark Souls. He also has a sword. And he's against this really big guy called John Bossman, who has this humongous axe. And he's like a minotaur or something. He's got like horns. Now, this is not turn-based, this setting. It's real time. And so there are different considerations for combat. And granted, a lot of the things we talked about in the turn-based example still apply. You have your damage, you have your health, you have probably the element of the hit, the resistances of the guy. But this accuracy and evasion component is now different. They're no longer simple variables that interact with each other to form a, evading mechanic or system. They are now something that the player has a lot more direct interaction with, because evasion is now not based on a number, it's based on your movement. If John Dark Souls does not want John Bossman to cut him in half with a gigantic axe, he has to evade him. And there is sort of there's different mechanics and different systems in play here. So the system of avoiding damage could go many ways. You could literally just move out of the way. You could block. You can roll away. Those are your defensive systems in this case. So let's look at one particular mechanic, which is notorious in Dark Souls games, which is the dodge roll. So this guy goes, he tries to swing his axe, and right before the axe hits, John Dark Souls goes, whoa! And he rolls over here. I have no idea how to draw a stick figure rolling, something like this. Yeah, and yeah, so he rolls. It's close enough. We'll put a little spiral on it so we know he's spinning around. So he rolls away. And on the outside to the player, it's like, oh, well, I rolled, I dodged, I evaded the hit. And there are some other variables and mechanics that feed into the dodge roll. So let's talk about some of these variables. There are things that most dedicated players will know, but the average player might not. So important to a dodge roll is an iframe. Now, the I in iframe stands for invincible, invulnerable, something of that nature. Essentially, if you are in this frame, you can't be damaged. You're invincible. So even if this axe literally swings through your body while you're rolling, it's not going to deal damage to you because you have an iframe active. And this is, it cuts a little from the real, but games aren't about realism anyway, So the player has to act in a certain time frame that ensures that even if this big axe were to hit them, they're in the iframes. They're invulnerable. They don't need to worry about it. For the average player, they might just do it as a method of timing. It's the feel of the dodge roll. It's not actually thinking about the specific iframes that are involved. For a more dedicated player or somebody who data mines or something like that, they know the exact amount of iframes that they're getting on that roll. So let's say that a game runs at 60 frames per second. Let's say you have 12 iframes. So that's 12 out of 60. That's 0.2 seconds of not being able to get hit. For the most part, that gives you a general idea on the timing that you're supposed to have. But I would say even the most advanced players aren't, rolling and thinking like, oh, I have to nail these 12 iframes in order to get there. But it's still the point that variable is determining whether the player even knows it's there or not. That variable is determining how the player is going to play, how they're going to interact with your video game. And so all of this is to set up the discussion that'll be in the next video, which is, why does all this matter? Which is it's a hard question to answer. For me, who's worked alongside, a lot of devs, I've done a lot of systems and mechanics work. The biggest thing that the developers and players need to understand about variables, mechanics, and systems comes down to game balance and game vision to a lesser degree. And balance is sort of an icky word in some game communities. Some people don't like when you bring up balance. I'll go into that in the next video too. But all three of these things play into what the developer must consider in making a well-balanced game that all sorts of players can enjoy no matter what choices they decide to make, unless they're, you know, choices that really go against the developer's vision, which we'll also get into that. And players should be aware of balance in the sake of providing quality feedback for products that they enjoy a lot, and also in the case of understanding that if you are abusing something in a game that goes completely against a developer's vision, that might not necessarily be a good thing in the long run, even if it does provide a bit of momentary fun, and to sort of keep the grand idea of balance in mind with how you approach video games. So that's about all for this one. Hopefully it was informative. Hopefully this thing wasn't too squeaky. I'll definitely have to lock it down next time. But yeah, so in the next video I'm going to talk about the justifications and the importance of game balance in really any genre of game, and how that affects player experience and why developers and players should both care about it. But yeah, if you watched all this, thank you. You know, I like yapping about game design, and I'm glad you're here. I hope I see you in the next one. So, goodbye.